This episode is brought to you by Indie Film Hustle Academy, where filmmakers and screenwriters go to learn from top Hollywood industry professionals. Learn more at ifhacademy.com. I'd like to welcome to the show Chairman of Cooke Optics, Les Zellan. How you doing, man?
Good. How are you, Alex?
I'm very good. Thank you so much for taking the time out. I know you're a very busy man to talk to the tribe today about all things Cooke and glass and images and all sorts of cool stuff.
Well, it's one of my favorite topics. So yeah, I'm happy to be here.
So first question, how did you get into this film business in the first place?
Well, there's a good question. Back in I'm actually a lighting designer for the theater. Mm-hmm. And then back in between 1976 and 79, I was working for a company called Colortran and doing inside engineering, laying out theaters and laying out studios. And then in 79, I went to work for a company called FERCO, which was Film Equipment Rental Company. That was obviously a rental company in New York, as their sales manager. And almost at day one, I was approached by somebody saying, can I buy an Aton camera from you? And I said, well, sure. Well, I didn't know the fix was in, and that at the time, Aton was really just struggling to get a foothold in the United States. And, you know, ARRI was the 800-pound gorilla, and the fix was in. And, you know, you could be a could be a dealer for Aton, but God help you if you sell any of them. You know, so I lasted at FERCO until about September, and to this day, the guy that ran FERCO at the time can't remember if I quit or he fired me. Our memories are pretty fuzzy because they sold a lot of Aton cameras, right, and they really pissed them off. And then I started my own company in the fall of 79 to sell Aton cameras, which led me, of course, to lenses, because you need a lens on a camera. At the time, the really hot lenses were the Ingenue 9-557 and the 12-120. And then Cooke approached me in 1981, I think, because the Aton at the time was the only Super 16 camera. And Cooke had, believe it or not, the only Super 16 lens.
Really?
They made two 16 millimeter lenses. One was called the CVK, Cine Veri Kennetal, and there were two versions of it, a 9-50 for regular 16 and a 10.4 to 52 for Super 16. So they approached me because they couldn't give this lens away anywhere. And I was selling a Super 16 camera. And lo and behold, it went from a product they couldn't give away to a product they couldn't make fast enough. Thomas Siegel, I think, was the first guy that I convinced to take it. And he took, I think, Thomas in his pre-ASC days was a documentary guy in New York. And he had an Aton camera, and he took a Cooke lens, I think, down to when he was selling like Nicaraguan, the Sandinistas, and all that. And he came back, and the footage that he had was just stunning, and it blew everything else away. So the result of that is that then we had a line of people at the door looking to buy this lens. And that was my beginning of a relationship with Cooke that has endured for, almost 40 years. And I wanted to buy the company, straight away. And they didn't want to sell it to me, obviously. And then 20 years later, in 1998, when Cooke really had fallen on hard times and was it was virtually bankrupt and pretty much out of business. I was able to buy it then. And as they say, the rest is history. We've turned the company around. I really do. I don't think it's boasting to say that Cooke is now, once again, an industry leader in developing optics for cameras and developing lenses for the industry. And it's sort of gotten crazy with, a new format every week. But,
very much so. Well, I have to ask you the question though. So you obviously you've been in love with this company since 81, basically, or right before then when you first were introduced to them, and you basically you just held on, waiting for this
Oh,
this young lady to say, "Fine, I'll marry you." Fine. It took
yeah,
forever. What
yeah,
did
it
you?
was.
But
Go ahead. I'm sorry.
what did you see in a barely functioning, if not completely bankrupt company that
That's a,
nobody else saw?
that's a really great question, and like there's an expression in real estate that buyers are liars. And what that means is they say, I want this kind of house and I want that kind of neighborhood and I want this, that, and the other thing. And then they walk into a house that has none of those things and they fall in love. And they say, this is it. And that's almost what it was with me and Cooke. The first time I went to Cooke, actually the second trip I went to Cooke, I had my wife with me and I said to Barbara, I said, I want to buy this company. And that was based on, I don't know anything about manufacturing. I knew nothing about glass. I mean, it was just instant emotional response to seeing how this company was set up. At the time, it was part of the Rank organization and part of Rank Taylor Hobson, which was at the time, a very big company, and with lots of interest, of which Cooke was insignificant. And it was obvious from just walking through the end of the factory that Cooke was in, and I mean, we just had a little shoebox inside of a big factory, that it didn't belong there. It was obviously a cottage industry stuck inside this big company and didn't get the attention it needed. Why I had an affinity for it, it's one of those great what ifs. I just don't know.
But you saw something. But on a business standpoint, you must have looked at it and said, "I think I can turn this around. I think I can make." Because I mean, love is love, but on a business standpoint,
way too much credit.
So literally, it was just love. I just want to buy this.
I got to tell you, I'm not a numbers guy.
Okay.
I just had a gut feeling that I could do it.
Okay, fair enough.
And it took 20 years to get control. But once we got control, we've never looked back. And as I said, we've gone on from being barely alive to now. I believe we make more lens series and lenses for the industry than anybody else.
Now, in this company, if you could tell a little bit about the history of this company's been around forever.
The whole story of Cooke would make a great movie. And if you got anybody out listening that wants to write a script, so the company, the founder of the company was a guy named William Taylor in 1886.
Wow.
And the company was called Taylor Hobson. And he and his brother Smithies made lenses. And then, and just to give you an idea of how involved and how small the industry was back then, Kodak started in 1889. And before George Eastman started Kodak, he took the boat over to England and he spent some time with William Taylor to find out about lens making. So, I mean, it's all the whole history of the movie business is interwoven, between all these companies, but it's a fascinating story. Anyway, Cooke, the Cooke brand, it came out in 1892, 93. There was a guy that worked for a company up in York. My company's based in Leicester, by the way, Leicester, England. And there was a guy in New York, a guy named Dennis Taylor, and he's no relation to my Taylors. And he worked for a company called T. Cooke and Sons, and they made telescopes. But Dennis Taylor came up with this arrangement of glass that allowed you to get detail all the way to the edge of a photograph without shooting through a pinhole, with shooting through a wide aperture. Because in the 1880s, 1890s, to get detail to the edge, you really had to shoot at an f/64, basically you had to shoot through a pinhole camera.
Sure.
So this was revolutionary. And in fact, most optical historians consider this invention to be one of the most important in modern lens making and photography. But fortunately for me, it has no real application in telescopes. So the guys at T. Cooke and Sons went to their friends down in Leicester and said, "You want to use this patented invention we have?" And of course, not being stupid, they said, "You bet." And the deal was made, other than the money that changed hands, the deal was made that any lens using this invention would be called a Cooke lens. And hence from the early 1890s to now, Cooke has been in, one way or another, been in continuous production. We made all the Charlie Chaplin movies, the Mary Pickford movies, the famous Claire's Mansky movies. We made Wings, the first Academy Award-winning film. In fact, with the Speed Pancreas that came out because of sound film in the early 20s, you'd be hard-pressed from the early 20s to probably the mid-50s or 60s to find a film that we were not on. It was
Sure.
It was really, it was just a magical time. And then after World War II, Rank Organization took over Taylor Hobson, of which Cooke was a division. And we actually did very well under them for a while, because you've seen those old movies with the gong man at the beginning, and he hits the gong and it says, out there, Rank. Well, Taylor Hobson, J. Arthur Rank was a baker in England. He loved the movies. He built Pinewood, he built Rank Laboratories, he built Shepperton. I don't know if he bought Taylor Hobson because of the lenses or not, but in any case, he loved the film industry. Well, as the time goes on, Mr. Rank dies, and the whole focus of the Rank organization turns around. And instead of manufacturing, they decide they want to be in leisure businesses. So not only was it Cooke suffered, but things like Rank Centel, Century Strand, all their manufacturing companies, many of which you've never heard of because they're not in the motion picture business, fell on hard times. And this was probably starting in about the late 80s. So the product, our product got, at the time, we had stopped making prime lenses, the Speed Pancreas, in 1965, and then we started making zooms. And our zooms were, not only the two CVKs that I talked about earlier, but I'm sure most of if you guys are old enough, there was the 25 to 250 and the 20 to 100 zooms that really bought. I know Ingenue was out there, but we really bought zooms to the motion picture industry. But as they lost interest in manufacturing, they didn't make investments. So Ingenue, for instance, in Zoom, they came out with some products that weren't that good, but then they came out with, the HR series and then the Optimo series, and they just sort of left us behind, and Cooke was sort of withering on the vine for years. And then, as I said, in 1998, I was finally able to, for the fourth try, I was able to buy the company.
It's fascinating that you were literally able to, I'm sure pennies on the dollar, be able to pick.
I wish that were true. I wish that were true. I overpaid, but
at the end, it was
good to me.
Yeah,
it's been a great relationship. It's allowed me to go all over the world. It allowed me to talk to you about Cooke.
Yeah.
I don't regret a penny that I put into it, but it was not pennies on the dollar.
Okay, but you were still able to acquire a legacy company without question. Because I've known about Cooke from the days of my film school days. I mean, Cooke was Cooke, and I think it was even I went to film school in '96, so it was a couple years before you purchased it. So even then, there was still from the old cinematography teachers would be talking about like the old Cookes and all that stuff. But I wanted to ask you about the infamous and yet very famous Cooke look.
Well,
what is the Cooke?
Let me turn around. See that?
The Cooke look, which is now trademarked, of course.
Yes.
So what is the Cooke look?
To be fair, we did not invent that slogan. Mm-hmm. The industry invented that slogan, and then we sort of grabbed it.
Yeah, fair enough. So what is the Cooke look?
Well, that's a great question. On our website, on the Cooke website, we've asked cinematographers to write it down. And they all say more or less the same thing, but in different words. It's a warm look. It's a very, what I think Ed Lockman used the word round look, because it has a really nice, gentle fall off of focus. So it gives you a very dimensional look. And frankly, the warmness of the lens makes people look good. I mean, and who doesn't want to look good when they're getting photographed? In fact, in the old days, like in the old studio days, there were stars that put in their contract that they had to be photographed with Cooke lenses.
Because
So
they knew that much.
yeah, well, they know they know what makes them look good, and the Cooke look um, continues today. I mean, that ever since the speed Pancreals came out in the 20s, the Cooke look has been consistent. So, you know, you can, if you look at an old speed Pancreal relative to a new S7 or an S4 or whatever, the coloration and the fall off, it's all going to be very, very similar.
It was interesting because I remember watching a YouTube video of like a tour of your facility or the making of a lens, which I mean for lens geeks, and oh my God, it's just like it was like porn. I mean, it was beautiful. It was such a beautiful experience watching, just sitting there going, because it takes so much.
Yeah, people, you know, I do a lecture, which I've done all over the world, basically using, you know, PowerPoints, but how you build lenses, and interwoven with that is Cooke history and movie history. But it's I do it all over the world. I just came back from doing, I think, 5 lectures all over China a few weeks ago, and people find it fascinating, and I love doing it because it's an awakening to show people here's a tool that is basically their eye on the world is the lens, and they have no idea for the most part, other than it's got glass in the front and glass in the back and some metal, what goes into making a lens. And so I love doing it because usually usually the response is great.
Now, the one thing, and please correct me if I'm wrong, but each lens manufacturer has their basic kind of like Coca-Cola recipe for the coating.
It does. Oh, for the coating.
Yeah, for the coating. So, I mean, there is a specific kind of formula that you guys have.
But let's go back one step, because whereas the Cooke philosophy in lens design, forget the coatings for the moment,
sure,
but our philosophy has been the same from the speed Pancreals to today. Other manufacturers, if you look at their lenses, it will be all over the map. Now, most of them, and I can't take, most of them have come around to doing what we do now. They come up with a philosophy, and whatever that is, and it's not right or wrong, it's just their philosophy. And then all their lenses from that point forward have a similar look. But if you look back at like the old Zeiss Vistigons or the Super Speeds, the 35 was one color, the 20, you know, they were all different depending on who designed them, because they didn't have a corporate philosophy of what they were aiming at. So it came down to the designer. Where Cooke, one of our big advantages is we've been consistent. And, you know, one of the reasons I think the Panavision did the Primo lenses back in the late 80s was up until then, their glass was Cooke and Ingenue and Zeiss and Tokina and, you know, you fill in the blank. They bought lenses, they Panavized them, and they put it up. But that puts them all over the map. And one of the things that they did when they came out with the Primos is say, we are now color matched. Well, you know, Cooke's been color matched for already then. We were color matched for almost 70 years. So, but now I would agree with you that most manufacturers have a certain look to in the design. And to your direct question, do we all sort of guard our coating recipe? The answer is absolutely yes. But I will tell you, the coating recipe that everybody thinks imparts the magic to the lens is a few percent of the magic.
Mm-hmm.
The real Cooke look or the brand X look doesn't come so much from the coatings. It comes mainly from the choices of glasses that you use to build your lens with. And each glass not only has a different index of refraction, but also has a different color transmission characteristics. So by choosing those glasses carefully, you give it the personality. The coatings add just a skosh, but not a lot.
Right, and it's also about the way the sand, how you get this, like, I mean, all the raw materials to build everything, and then the process of building it. It's right, but it's artisan.
Fair, yeah, but to be fair, we all use the same raw materials now. In the old days, you know, We used to smelt glass right now, but right now the reality is there are 2 or 3 or 4 optical glass manufacturers in the world, and we all use their material. So whether it's a Zeiss lens or a Cooke lens or an ingenue lens, the material comes from the same half a dozen manufacturers around the world.
So it's more about the processing and actually the
And
craftsmanship.
and the choices. I mean, if you look at a glass mat, it has maybe 100 different types of glass on it that each have different characteristics. So our designers, knowing that they want to get the Cooke look coming in, at the end, they pick the glass types that will not only obviously focus the lens where we need it, but also the right color transmission and the right contrast, and everything else that we're looking for that goes into the Cooke lens, so that we get the Cooke look out the back.
Which the one thing that's funny that I'm listening to, and it's something that I hope everyone listening understands, is that you as a company have decided that this is the kind of product that we're going to put out. So every time you buy a Cooke lens, you expect a certain level of quality, a certain look, and you're not playing around with it. You're not like, oh, well, let's do a little darker look here. Let's make it a little sharper edged here. Like, no, we're Cooke, and this is what people want from us, and we're going to deliver that.
And the reason we do that is because that's obviously what people want. I mean, they wouldn't have come back to us and said, this is the Cooke look and we want it. I'm such a big star, I can dictate what lenses I want to be photographed with. If they didn't like the look, I mean, we would be out of business years ago.
Now, the lens that kind of put you guys back on the map was the S4s, right?
Absolutely.
So what was it like with that? Because when you guys released, it took you a few years to release it after you took over the company. But
we actually released, to be fair, the previous management, before I came along, started the
development.
Let me backtrack just a bit. So the Primos come out in the late 80s, early 90s. The non-Panavision world goes into a panic, literal panic, because up until then, the non-Panavision world thought Panavision was on the ropes, that they were going to be dead and, or sold off for parts in a few years. Primos absolutely changed that whole calculation. And all the customers that were floating away from Panavision, because they realized that why should I run a Panavision 25 to 250 when I can just get the real thing, a Cooke thing from Otto or Denny or whoever at a better price. So the Primos come out, that whole flow away from Panavision obviously starts to flow back. They have the hot new product. So the non-Panavision world goes to everybody. Everybody. They went to Cooke, they went to Zeiss, they go to Arri, they go to Takina, they go to I can't remember Ingenue, but Nikon, Canon. You can fill in any lens manufacturer in the world. They went to all of them, and for whatever reason, this is about 92, 93. For whatever reason, Cooke is the only one that said yes. And so we started Cooke. The previous management started the project. And he did it as a skunk works project. He didn't have permission to do it from the rank board. They would have never given him the money to do this. But he did it because he told me, because I met him right after he decided to do it. And he said, well, I'm going to do this and I can do it in a year. So they'll never find it. By the time they find out about it, I'll be a hero, right? Yes, I wasn't. It's better to ask forgiveness than permission.
Yes.
And of course, if you're asking for forgiveness and your order book just went from almost nothing to this, forgiveness is pretty easy to give. Well, even though I didn't know anything about manufacturing and optical design at the time, I know he was dreaming. This was a major project. And it dragged on and on and on and on and on. And in fact, when I took over the company in 98, it was close to being done, but it wasn't finished. I won't go into all the gory details of what happened on how he hid the money from spending from the, but it was not a pleasant thing. But that's neither here nor there. So when I got there, several of the S4s were prototyped. So we very quickly turned that into production, and we got out 4 lenses. I can't remember the first 4, but it's probably the 18, 25, 50. I don't even. I
Yeah.
don't remember the first four.
Sure.
But this was a magical time in the industry. And this is when you say, you knock on wood because you're at the right place at the right time. So all the people that had passed, and the only ones that I care about passing were Zeiss and Arri and Angelo. So they passed on this. So, and I mean, I understand. They had in the prime world, there were the Distigons and the super speeds, which were, even then, were 30-year-old designs. Arri and Zeiss were making a ton of money on those, right? They're 30 years old designs, the tooling, everything's been paid off years ago, and we're still selling them. And so, yeah, the Primos are a bit of a problem, but our stuff is still selling. Nobody's got anything to compete with it. Well, we come out with the S4s. They were the first modern non-Panavision lens, and the world winds up at my door.
Wow.
So I went from no business to 3 or 4 years worth of business almost overnight. and then Zeiss and Arri went into a bit of a panic, and they put up, you know the story about putting an infinite number of monkeys with an infinite number of typewriters in a room. And sooner or later, out comes, all the great works. But they did pretty much the same thing with lens designers, and they put them in a room and said, don't come out until what became not the master primes, the
Z, was it? Yeah, I know what you're talking about.
The ones before it'll come to me anyway. But that gave us, really, if you think about that took them about 3 years to do. That gave us a window from 98 to 2001 that we were all alone. We had the only new primes in the industry, and they were just incredibly the demand, as I said, went off the shelf, off the charts. Sorry.
Right.
And so, right place, right time. Knock on wood. The S4s are still one of our best-selling products, and this year, they're 21 years old this year.
Wow.
They're still selling. I think S4s are more or less the standard of the industry.
Now, can we discuss a little bit about vintage glass? Because there is something to be talked about vintage Cooke lenses and what happens to it. Because a lot of people don't understand. They're like, oh, I need a brand new lens. I'm like, well, not necessarily. You might.
Well, but we're actually dealing with that. So
tell me. As
you know, a lot of people love shooting with the old speed Pancreal. Well, again, to step back a little bit, let's thank digital for being a boring and sterile format.
Right.
So when digital comes in, pre-digital, people were throwing away or giving away old speed Pancreals. We're never going to use this again. Let's get rid of it. Sell it for $50.
I know. I remember. I heard the stories. It hurts.
Yeah. So digital comes in. And I thank Jim Gennard every morning. The revolution he started is simply amazing.
Yep.
I'm not crazy about digital from a personal taste. Does tend back toward film, but I loved it as a manufacturer. Digital has been amazing for me. It's taken a small market and made it astronomically big, and it's caused people to think, wow, it's really a little boring and sterile. How can I put the character and personality I used to get in film? How do I re-inject that into digital? And of course, one of the easy ways is to use old glass. The problem with old glass is that it's old glass. So, like with our old speed Pancreals, keep in mind the last speed Pancreal we made was in 1965. So if you found one today, it's almost 54 years old, right? At best. And it was probably one made in the late 40s, early 50s. So it's a lot older. We're talking 70-year-old glass, 60, 70-year-old glass. Anyway, so that glass still makes beautiful movies, but it is a pain in the ass because every lens is a different color. Mm-hmm. They've all discolored over time. I know when they were shooting the first 2 seasons of The Crown, the DIT, they shot on speed Pancreals, the DIT had a separate lookup table for each lens.
Oof.
Oh, yeah. So we looked at that and we said, well, speed Pancreal. Okay. I understand. I get it. I know why people want to use the glass, and it does have if you remember the old speed Pancreals, they were very small lenses, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the S4s are significantly bigger. Well, the S4s are significantly bigger, so we could give you a better field performance than the Pancreals. The main difference between a Pancreal and an S4 is that the fall off of focus on an S4 starts at what we call the picture height area. If you can imagine a frame and you put a vertical line through the frame at the axis and make a circle of that area, that round circle is where we try to keep it pretty clean, and then we let the fall off come in. And that's, well, I've told you too much now because that's part of the Cooke look. So I may have to kill you. Sorry. I didn't mean that, guys.
I know he's joking. He's joking.
You can't say anything. Anyway,
it's a joke.
The reason the S4s got bigger were not only to solve mechanical problems that people wanted better scaling and better footage scales and all this other things, but it was also to increase the glass diameter and get better performance in the field. The Pancreals, so the basic difference is a Pancreal, the focus falls off as soon as you come off the axis. So the fall off starts really, you move 2 pixels over and you're already losing focus. It's very gradual and very flattering, but that's the main difference between a speed Pancreal and any of modern Cooke lenses. Except we noticed this, and there are only a finite number of old speed Pancreals or old anything out there. They're all discolored. They're all in probably desperate need of mechanical and optical parts that don't exist anymore now. And there are some companies that are trying to fix that, but we're not one of them. So we took a look at the old speed Pancreal designs and said, let's just remake these. I mean, we can remake them. We can do 2 things. We can remake them in a new housing with new glass, but keep true to the old look and feel of the fall off. And we can increase the coverage. Is like the 18 and the 25, and I think the 32 didn't really cover Super 35. They covered the original Silent 35. So we fixed all those issues. We added the metadata, our eye system, which is evolving into an industry standard, and we put them out as the Pancreal Classics. And they're doing phenomenally well. And we know we've really got it right. We've had some very big name DPs that almost shot exclusively on Pancreals, or the old speed Pancreals. And the last 2 features that this one particular guy did, when he tested them against his old speed Pancreals and the new Classics, he ended up using the Classics. I mean, it takes a headache out of it. You get the look, you get the feel, but you don't need a different lookup table for every lens. Right. You can get parts. They're much easier for an assistant to use because they're more S4 in mechanical, but Pancreal Classic, Pancreal Super Speed Pancreal in look.
That's amazing. So you guys actually took the old concepts of the vintage and what made it so beautiful, and then just redid them. And what I like to tell people is the Pancreal Classics probably look like the speed Pancreal did when they took it out of the box 60 years ago, when it was a clean glass and operational, So, and they've been extremely popular. And again, everything I make, including S4s, we've never had, for 21 years, we've never had stock. We build to order, and we're on back order in varying degrees on everything we make. And we've expanded we built a new factory, we've built a second factory, we've gone from 36 to 130 some people, and we still can't make stuff fast enough. Wow. That's a good problem to have. That's a good problem to have. Now, what is Cooke doing to adapt to this new generation of mega resolution cameras out there? The 8K, 10K, 25K, 50K eventually, I'm sure.
I know. You say that exactly the way I do. I get up to a gazillion K.
I mean, like, at what point do we just, our eyes just can't comprehend K? We could talk
Well,
about Ks in a minute, but
we've already, I think we've pretty much passed that once we go past HD, depending on the size of the screen. But
sure.
if you're sitting in your living room watching a movie, and you got I don't know, say a 65-inch set, unless you're sitting like a foot away, you don't get the benefit of that UHD.
No.
I mean, so all these resolutions, what I like to tell people, now, can your old speed Pancreals handle all these new resolutions? Well, people are making movies with them every day, and they like what they see.
Right.
So a lot of this is just marketing hype.
Of course.
But are we dealing with it? Sure. I mean, every time there's a new format, it causes us to say, oh, shit, there's a new format. On the other hand, it puts a big smile on my face, is that, oh, shit, people are going to have to buy more lenses. Isn't this great? So
right.
when the industry, Red is, I think Red is the big culprit here as far as changing formats. But then I think the whole camera manufacturing industry is the culprit here. The thing that annoys me about full frame isn't that I don't love it. I love making lenses for it. Our S7s and our new full frame anamorphics are extremely popular. And, we'll chat about that in a minute. But full frame came about, in my mind, it was nothing anybody was asking for. Nobody was saying, gee, Super 35 just isn't good enough. We really need
five more
a
pixels.
bigger format so I can watch a movie on my phone. I mean, this makes no sense to me, as just me personally. Me as a lens manufacturer, I say, oh boy, a new set of lenses. So with Red and now the rest of the industry the rest of the manufacturers pushing full frame, of course, we developed the S7i lenses and actually had them on the market, I think, before the cameras. I think that's never happened before. People think that the camera manufacturers and the lens guys are talking to each other all the time. But for the old days when Arri and Zeiss were together, which they're not anymore, that's not true. We find out about it just like everybody else does, listening to rumors in the industry and trying to make the right guess. Well, we made the right guess on the full frame. We came out with the S7, I think 2-3 years ago now, just as the cameras were starting to come out. They've been extremely successful. Because basically they're taking the S4 and scaling it up. It's not just scaling up an S4, it's a whole brand new design, but the look and feel of it when you were done looks like a Cooke lens, so a modern Cooke lens. So we did that well. And then last year, we announced the full frame anamorphics, which we will start delivering in about, we'll have, last year at IBC, we announced them at IBC last year. We said we'll have them by NAB, and we will have the first 4 lenses at NAB this year and start delivering thereafter. And there we've taken a bit of a flyer. Well, I shouldn't say that. We've got tons of orders for them, so I know we nailed it. But one of the things we did is instead of doing a 2x squeeze like we do in traditional 35, we did a 1.8 squeeze. And there was a lot of thought and care that went into that equation. And it looks like we really nailed it.
Good.
And the 1.8 look is almost indistinguishable from 2, except the most trained of eyes. And it's great. It looks good. The reason we went to 2, if we had done 2 and you wanted to do a 2.4, traditional 2.4 release, you'd lose about 25% of the pixels in full frame. If you want to use the full 3x2 full frame, it's a 1.6 squeeze. Well, the problem with the 1.6 squeeze is it's not really anamorphic looking. It's sort of maybe, it could be different, maybe it is, maybe not. It's really uninteresting. And in my mind, excuse me, the only reason to shoot anamorphic is that you want it to look anamorphic. I mean, I know there's some companies making very clean anamorphs that look spherical, And I just have to scratch my head when I see these and think, what the hell were they thinking? Why would I want to go to all the trouble of shooting anamorphic
Right.
when I can just, crop my frame and get widescreen, and nobody's calling out for resolution. There's plenty of resolution. So anyway, so the 1.8, if you do a 2x squeeze, you lose too many pixels. If you want to go the whole frame, it's 1.6, and that's not interesting. 1.8, it's right in the middle. You lose about 10% of the pixels, but it looks like 2. I've shown it to DPs. Most of them can't tell whether it's the 2 or the 1.8.
Mm-hmm.
And as an added benefit, if you were doing a 2x squeeze and you wanted to go to full frame, you'd be at about 3.1 ratio, which is just not a very pleasing ratio. It's too wide.
Right.
But if you go from a 1.8 squeeze and use the whole frame, you're at a 2.7. Well, 2.7 is just under 2.76, which was ultra Panavision.
Sure.
And that's a really, that's a pleasing range. And ultra Panavision, though, was shot with a 1.25 squeeze. So it was a little different. But the bottom line here is when I look at test film, and if you want to see some test shots, you can go up to the Cooke Vimeo site,
Mm-hmm.
and there's a bunch of tests up there. I think this is in the, I can't even remember. If you go to the Vimeo site, it's the first test on the right.
Mm-hmm.
And it has all our lenses shooting the same thing over and over again, but showing you, and it's pretty impressive. It's everybody that sees it, and I think what's going to happen, looking at we've done most of our testing, obviously, on the Sony Venice, a great camera, by the way. I'm looking forward to seeing the new LF Mini, but the Venice is a great camera. And you look at it with the 2.4 lines, and then you look at it at 2.7, and you think, why wouldn't I release in 2.7? It's just really pretty. So I think in the long run, at full frame, 2.7 is going to become the ratio of choice to release them. But time will tell.
Now, one other question I want to ask you, and we kind of touched on it before, is the whole resolution and this kind of arms race with the resolution. Yeah. I want to ask you, in your opinion, are we going to get to a point, because I think we're getting there if we're not there already, that it just truly does not, like, you can't, like, the red 20K, why? Like, so what's the next generation? So what are these camera manufacturers, in your opinion, going to do to get us to buy new cameras if it's not resolution, in your opinion?
Yeah, but this is the problem. I mean, again, look when digital came in. What did people rush for? They rushed for old speed Pancreals, bullpars.
Sure.
Frankly, the reason we decided to do anamorphics, I've been asked to do anamorphics for 20 years, from the day I bought the company. Mm-hmm. We didn't jump into anamorphics until digital. Because again, for the same reason, people are looking to make digital interesting, and anamorphic is a great way to do that. I think we've already passed the point of no return in what you were asking. What people have lost sight of, and this really annoys me with a large part of the industry, is that they're letting the technology wag the dog. Mm-hmm. It used to be the story would make the decisions. And frankly, the ultimate resolution does not make a picture that anybody wants to watch. And in fact, usually the more resolution you have, the worse it gets. So,
touche.
So that's why people are using the old lenses. They're using their anamorphic. They're trying to put character into what is becoming a more and more sterile image. So I think, as I said, I think this whole arms race is a marketing bullshit. 2, 4, 8, 16, a million K. I know there are engineers out there that will argue with me, but we're not engineers. At least I'm not an engineer. And my customers, my ultimate customers, the filmmakers, they're not engineers. They're storytellers. And they have to pick the right tool that will tell their story. And I'm sorry, it's hard for me to imagine that I want to tell any kind of drama or romantic comedy or any kind of story in 20K resolution or even an 8K. I mean,
Right.
it's going to look like shit. So,
Yeah, the actors aren't super happy about it because I was looking at some of these images that the DP did not know what they were doing. Some of these movies that are shot in these high resolutions, and you start seeing every
everything.
little thing on some aging
But
actors or actresses. They just don't look
I
good.
mean, you're old enough to remember when HD took over,
Oh,
right?
of course, of course. I was there when
You were
Sony showed
you
up.
were on the cusp of that.
I was at a workshop and I saw Sony show up with the first HD cameras, like,
Right.
and they went out and we shot flowers and bumblebees and stuff. But can you imagine from the SD world to the just straight up 1920 by
Right.
1080?
But you remember everybody panicked then because they had to,
Oh yeah.
the flats. You could see the seam in the flats. You
Oh,
could see things
everything. The makeup,
that
all the caked on
makeup,
makeup.
everything had to
Oh,
change. Okay, so we got to HD, and HD is still within sort of the human vision purview.
for the most part,
But
yeah.
anything beyond that, unless you're putting it on a 900-foot screen, is a waste of time. And as I said, we get all this resolution, so I can watch the movie on my phone. So I
I know.
mean,
It's brutal. It's brutal.
and nobody was complaining that the Alexa was the most popular. Yeah, it probably still is the most popular camera, which is basically an HD camera on steroids, right? It's not 4K. And I've seen Alexa images projected on,
Oh,
big, like
stunning.
big, like Leicester Square in England, big downtown theater screens. And you're not sitting there saying, gee, I can see the space between the pixels. I wish they had 4K resolution for this. So
I shot my last film on the Blackmagic Pocket 1080p camera. The whole feature I shot on that with some
yeah.
nice vintage glass and some nice new glass, and I projected it on a theater. And I was like, this looks beautiful. It was fine.
Well, you get the right images with the right story,
Exactly.
and it works. And it
Right.
works. And
If you
that's
give me
why,
$200 million, I'm not shooting it on the 1080p camera. If you give me $200 million,
well,
I'll probably get on an
again,
Alexa.
yeah, you say that, but again, the story should drive
At the end of the day,
your choices, not the tech. The last thing you should choose, to me, would be, okay, this is my story, blah blah blah. The camera and the lens combination that will give me the look I'm looking for is this. Right now, people say, "Ooh, there's a new Mini LF. I have to shoot my next movie on the Mini LF. I must have it."
I must have the next Red. I must have the next Alexa. I must have the
Yeah, I mean,
next.
that's. I really think, as I said, the tail's wagging the dog, and I find that really. I find that really sort of abdication of responsibility of the DPs.
Yeah, because I remember I was talking to a few of my friends who are in the ASC, and they were telling me back in the days, like producers are telling me what to shoot on now. Like they're like, we need to shoot on Red, we need to shoot on this camera, and they're like, but I'm the DP. That's my job to choose that.
Right. Well, yeah, digital is unfortunately.
Changed all of it.
Yes, it has changed the roles. It's really changed the roles of a lot of people on the set.
Yeah, without question.
But luckily for me, they still need lenses.
At the end of the day, you're still coming up aces every time.
We do try.
So I'm going to ask you a few questions. I ask all of my guests. Okay. What advice would you give a filmmaker wanting to break into the business today?
Wow. Not being a filmmaker myself, that's hard, but
you've known a couple in your day.
I've known a few. Again, when I go back to the old days when I started in the business, and I'm working with people like Tom Siegel and Sandy Sissel, and most of the people I used to work with in Aton have gone on to become ASC members. So but they all worked. They all started. They all either went to film school or they just went to a rental house, and they started by cleaning cases. Mm-hmm. And they would literally apprentice. They'd clean cases. They'd start working on the prep floor. Somebody would notice them and say, "Yeah, you can be the 900th assistant on this weekend when I'm doing something." And they'd work their way up. They'd become a first, then they'd become an operator, then they'd start making films. And along that way, which could be, depending on their talent, could be, at least years, if not many years, they would learn the craft. I think a lot of people get out of film school today and say, I'm a DP.
because I can afford a red. I'm a DP all of a sudden.
Yeah. So I would say, and what I've seen is the most, so if you're a DP, you obviously need to know how to frame a shot. And I think, frankly, I think a lot of people like the full frame cameras because it does allow you to be a little bit lazier. And in digital, obviously, allows you to be much lazier. But full frame, you didn't quite get it right, but I can pan and scan, and maybe that's the shot I should have had up there. Because I'm still going to release it in 35. So that's the shot I should have had. So, so I think people become a little bit less prepared. And I think digital did that in by itself. Certainly in film, you couldn't do that. You had to really know what you were doing.
Oh, yeah.
So, but the real key, when the real key, besides having a good eye for framing, is learning how to light. I mean, that's the DP's, his two tools, or his tools are his camera, his lens, and his lighting, and hopefully his talent to frame. And people that know how to light could shoot Super 8 and make it really look good. And people that don't know how to light, if it looks good, it's completely by accident. So, but you learn that. You don't necessarily learn that in a couple of years in film school. You learn that by watching, the masters, by working on sets and watching the masters do this every day. So what I would recommend to people is just find get yourself in good with some really good DPs and work for them for a while and learn everything you can.
Now, what is the lesson that took you the longest to learn, whether in the film business or in life?
What is the lesson that took me the longest to learn? Just about everything. I'm a slow learner, but well, that's a great question. I'm not sure I have an answer for it.
All right, no worries, no worries.
I'm not going to worry. That's one of the things I learned. Don't worry about what you can't answer.
Fair enough. Fair enough. Now, what are 3 of your favorite films of all time?
Oh, that's unfair.
I know it is
Unfair
extremely.
question.
But for currently at this moment in time, right now, 3 of your favorite films.
Well, I've got to say, it should be. Let's see, all the films shot on Cooke.
Of course, obviously. Yeah, you've got to be politically correct or you can't say a movie.
I was one of those guys that actually helped pull the upset off in the Academy this year. I voted for the Green Book. I thought that was.
Yeah, I thought it was a great book.
I thought it was well done. I hate films that. I really hate films that lecture to me and want to show me the way it should be. I thought the Green Book was just a nicely put together, great story. Yes, and there was a message and all that, but I just thought
the performances, the writing and the performances were brilliant.
Now, yeah, my wife preferred Bohemian Rhapsody. I didn't do much for me.
If you take the music out of that movie,
a lot of that was shot with Speed Pancreas, by the way.
Okay.
Bohemian Rhapsody, and then of course I should really want. Lady Gaga.
Stars Born.
Stars Born, because that was shot by Maddie with Cooke Anamorphics.
Yeah, it was gorgeous. It was a beautiful
That
film.
should be my favorite film, but of all time though, one of my favorite films, this is really corny, but I'm an old guy.
Sure.
One of my favorite films is, I'm so old, my mind is going. Jimmy Cagney and Yankee Doodle Dandy.
Okay.
I'm just light, fluffy. I could watch that film probably 20 times and still enjoy it.
Very cool. Now, where can people find more about Cooke and more about you?
Well, they don't need to know much about me, but they can find more about Cooke on cookeoptics.com. Also, we just as of today, the U.S. distributor for Cooke used to be a company called ZGC, which is a company I started. You see the Cooke Americas as of today. So, but you can go to cookeoptics.com and find out all you need to know.
Very cool. Les, it's been an absolute pleasure talking to you and geeking out on Cooke, all things Cooke and lenses and stuff today. So I appreciate your time. I know you're a busy man. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. As I said, I can only talk about Cooke endlessly. If you want to do this again for another 6 or 7 hours, just give me a call.
All right. Appreciate it.